We're all familiar with the events of World War II. There's Angelina Jolie's movie Unbroken about US prisoners of war in Japan. There is the movie about the atomic bomb, Oppenheimer, and there is the not so historically accurate movie Pearl Harbor. But there may be something about World War II that not everybody is familiar with, and that is the Japanese internment camps. Welcome to Manzanar National Historic Site, a location dedicated to preserving the history of Japanese internment camps in the USA. Soon after the attack on Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt signed an executive order imprisoning about 120,000 Japanese living on the West Coast. Those Japanese, some of them US citizens, some of them adults, some of them elders, and some of them little kids, were taken from their homes. The men were sent to different prisons throughout the country where they were interrogated to see if they were sympathizers with the Japanese and to see if they were potentially spies. They were eventually reunited here with their families. This is Manzanar, one of 10 internment camps throughout rural parts of the USA. I first learned about these internment camps through this book, Farewell to Manzanar, that I read in high school. It's written from a young lady's perspective, and she talks about life throughout this camp. Since reading this book, it has long since been a dream of mine to come up here and see for myself the sites that she was talking about. Let's head on in so I can give you a tour of this site using some of the excerpts from this book. To experience this national park, you take a 3-mile driving tour through the encampment that allows you to get out and explore what life would have been like during the imprisonment of the Japanese. If you get here on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Monday, you can also go into the museum inside the visitor center. They're only open on those days because there is a shortage of national park employees. This is one of 36 different blocks here at Manzanar. Each one of the 36 blocks had 14 barracks, like those behind me. Each barrack measures about 20 feet by 100 feet. And then each one of these barracks were divided into 4 separate rooms measuring 20 by 25 feet. Most of the apartments were used as dwellings. It could have been one single family or multiple couples living in one of these rooms. Each individual was issued a standard military cot with 2 blankets. Living conditions were pretty rough. Right out this window, we have Mount Whitney, which is the tallest mountain in the lower 48. And it's covered in snow. They would get some pretty harsh winters here. Now, if we go out the other window, you can see that mountain range over there. Right on the other side of that mountain range is Death Valley, the hottest place in the world and the driest place in the US. She recollects in her book, after dinner we were taken to Block 16, a cluster of 15 barracks that had just been finished a day or so earlier, although finished is hardly a word for it. The shacks were built of one thickness of pine planking covered with tar paper. Gaps showed between the planks, and as the weeks passed, and the green wood dried out, the gaps widened. Knotholes gaped in the uncovered floor. We woke early, shivering and coated with dust that had blown up through the knotholes and through the silts around the doorway. A skin of sand covered the floor. You would be assigned one of these according to your family size. Many young Japanese got married right before they were forced into these internment camps just so they wouldn't be separated from their loved ones. Those young couples without children would oftentimes be forced to share rooms with other young couples. There could be as many as 8 people in this room, or 4 couples. You didn't get much privacy in here. One of the options for some visual privacy would have been to string a blanket from the ceiling, like we see over here. She describes it. Partitioning off a room like that wasn't easy. All they had to use for room dividers were those army blankets, 2 of which were barely enough to keep one person warm. They argued over whose blanket should be sacrificed, and later argued about the noise at night. It didn't take long for ingenuity to take over. For the lucky few who could afford it, they were able to have some furniture from home and storage sent in here to the camps. And those who were handy with a hammer were able to use shipping crates to build some of the furniture they needed. They turned these horrible barracks into a home. The government would eventually put up drywall, and they even put linoleum on the floor to help with those gaps. Though it's an improvement, it wasn't much of an improvement. The camp also offered various forms of employment. With that money, you could mail order different supplies that your family would want, including toys, furniture, clothing, and other goods. Each block had its own block manager. One responsibility of the block managers was to manage the storehouse. In a room like this, they would have distributed basic necessities, including toilet paper, soap, light bulbs, and cleaning supplies. Some of the barracks were used as classrooms, though not at first. Education was always a priority, and social workers, parents, and other people worked really hard to provide a good education system. Classes started outside against the buildings and next to the barbed wires, and they didn't have textbooks. But within a year, the school system met California state standards. It is estimated that 2/3 of the Manzanar residents attended some type of education classes. There was everything from pre-K to high school, as well as adult education, which included carpentry and sewing. With that many people living here, there was a lot of clothes to be washed. So they had barracks that were used for washing. It was lined with sinks, and everybody would wash their dirty laundry together. Oftentimes, these rooms would be used for other things, such as a high school chemistry lab. There were no washing machines and there were no dryers. However, a wealthy couple did buy a washing machine that was for their sole use. Now, because there were no dryers, this whole area would have been full of clotheslines where they could dry their laundry. Now, every block also had its own mess hall. These mess halls were used for eating in, of course, but they also held social activities, including movies, meetings, and dances. They could also be used for some of those continuing education classes that we talked about. As time drew on, families stopped eating together in mess halls, and the camp social workers took note of it. At one point, it became a mandate that all families must eat together for every meal. Again, there are 36 different blocks here, meaning there are 36 different mess halls, and each one of those mess halls was bound to be different. Some kids would even try to see how many meals they could eat in the camp at each mess hall. So you would start in this mess hall right at the beginning of dinner, then you would gobble your food down really quick, move to the next, gobble your food down really quick, and go on from there just to see how many meals you could fit in. Rumors would start spreading over which cooks were the best, and it changed from day to day. And as those rumors changed, people would start going to different mess halls to see if the rumors were true. And it kind of created a little bit of competition between the cooks, even though the authorities discouraged the mess hopping. These mess halls served anything from traditional Japanese food to typical American foods, hamburgers and hot dogs. They were trying to please the elder Japanese people as well as the American-born offspring of those Japanese. Food was always a center of conflict for the residents here. They knew there was a food shortage, and they were worried that the government would abandon them and let them starve to death. And over time, that started to create real issues. In the late summer, early fall of 1942, some of the Japanese kitchen workers noticed that there wasn't as much sugar and meat as there should be, and started to accuse the Caucasian kitchen leaders of stealing the food and selling it on the black market. Of course, the residents here were not happy about that, and it would be the roots of a conflict that would lead to a riot. In December of 1942, a group of 6 men attacked a Japanese man who they thought was collaborating with the administration. The Caucasian security came through and arrested a few men, which made the residents here at the camp not happy. They believed that those arrests were a cover-up for what was really happening in the kitchen. All hell broke loose. There was a huge conflict between the residents and the security, and security even ended up killing a high school student. Though not part of the original plans, the government had to come in and build ironing rooms. The residents would iron in their little bunks over there, and it would blow the fuses and the whole barrack would be without electricity. So they built these ironing rooms, which were then used for other reasons, including stores, barbershops, sewing rooms, and gathering spots for social events. Each block had its own set of bathrooms that would serve 300 people. There was a men's building and there was a women's building with no privacy at all. Oftentimes, the plumbing would break and there would be fecal matter and urine everywhere. And like the kitchen, rumors would spread about the best place to go to the bathroom, and people would go bathroom hopping. The lack of privacy in the latrine was a huge embarrassment for a lot of the people here. But ingenuity took over and they got creative. She explains. One old woman had already solved the problem for herself by dragging in a large cardboard carton. She set it up around one of the bowls like a three-sided screen. Along with toilets, there was a place to shower as well, also lacking privacy. The Japanese living on the West Coast were forced out of their homes. They lost their investments, they lost their assets, and they were forced to live in these conditions. They were essentially prisoners in an internment camp for being Japanese. A lot of them had lived their whole entire lives in the US. To make things worse, in February of 1943, just a few months after the riot, the US government came in and decided that they were going to make everybody swear allegiance to the government. They issued what would become known as the loyalty papers. There was a series of questions, and it was kind of a two-edged sword, especially for questions 27 and 28. 27 stated, are you willing to pledge allegiance to the US government and forswear all allegiance to the Japanese government and the emperor? And question 28 was, would you be willing to serve in the US military? These people are being forced to live as prisoners. It wasn't the swearing allegiance to the US that was the problem. It was the forsaking your Japanese heritage and culture that was a problem. Though they lived in the US and none of them really wanted to leave and they were allegiant to the country. They didn't agree with the war, but they didn't want to forsake their heritage. I get that. Now, question 28, would you be willing to serve in the military? Again, after the government has done all of this to you, why would you want to go and die for it? Why would you want to fight against your own people? And it was a trick question. It became the yes, yes, no, no clause. Do you want to swear allegiance or do you not? If you do, then you have to go serve in the military. And if you answer no, then you're potentially guilty of espionage. It was a catch-22 situation, and it created a lot of animosity and hostility here in the camp. I know I've been painting a gloomy picture of this, but that's because it's horrible. But they did find a way to enjoy themselves. Many of them were adamant about not letting this situation tear them down. One of the more popular things they did was baseball. They are currently restoring the baseball fields right now because in a few months they are going to be hosting the two longest lasting Japanese American baseball teams. They also spent time building up these beautiful gardens, including this fish pond, though it's not really maintained that well today. And though they had several gardens throughout the whole entire camp, they only had one lawnmower. And that's not a joke either, that's the truth. This would be one of those other gardens that lawnmower would have to travel to. This is Merritt Park. It is actually a rose garden. Some of the internment prisoners here were gardeners before they were sent here, and they took that skill set to build this beautiful park. It is one of the few places in the entire camp where you can go and not see the barracks. There are several more sites to explore out here. Some of them are just foundations, some of them are ruined buildings, and some of them are just tumbleweeds. There is a Buddhist temple, a Catholic church, some wartime buildings where they helped with the wartime effort. There's a hospital, there's staff housing, just so much more to explore. But I am running out of daylight and I need to be heading off to my next location. Thank you for taking the time to learn about the Japanese American experience in the US during World War II. I hope you learned something new. If you want to learn more, I recommend the book that I was talking about, Farewell to Manzanar, or just Google what life was like. Thank you for joining me on this adventure and thank you for building memories with me. I look forward to seeing you next time.